All right, Ecclesiastes 3. Let's call this one Hope Forever. In this chapter that once again seems to break down in 3 sections. This time, the first section is a very famous section that talks about seasons. A few verses reading. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. So on and so forth. It's going to go for 8 verses describing the deeper wisdom in seasons and alluding to something we've seen before, the wisdom of understanding the right time for the right season. Understanding that life does not lend itself to easy answers that fit every season or every time of life. He's then going to go on in the second section, verses 9 through roughly 15, to go back to the issue of toil and the futility of work before concluding in the final set of verses 16 through the end of the chapter, verse 22, roughly, talking about the futility in life again in general, understanding that as men, we may seem to have an advantage over the beasts of the earth, but we all go from dust to dust, meeting the same end. And here he's going to conclude that ultimately we may be little better, if any better, than the beasts of the field, no matter how sophisticated we might seem. But one of the things that seems to matter is that concept of forever. And 2 things gave me hope in this chapter, beginning in that second section, where he's going to begin in verse 14. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, and that which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. And in that last verse, it seemed to offer to me the most hope. Understanding that I once got the question from some of my friends, why do you like groups like Outkast, a group that is old by today's standards, but back then they were on the ascent. They weren't quite as popular as they became, but they represented a part of hip hop's subculture that sought to give a voice to those who were left out of the mainstream. And they eventually set an example for the way in which those who are typically left out of the primary parts of life or the mainstream can eventually find a manner of success speaking for those who are left out. Which reminds me of what Solomon notices about God here in all of his power, needing no one. And like we mentioned in the last chapter, he's not the kind of God we can schmooze. In all that he has, he still looks out and has a genuine heart for those who have been cast aside, especially for those who have been cast aside because of their attempts to hold on to their integrity. Not something that he mentions here, but something that is woven throughout his father's writings and even his own in the Proverbs. A principle that may actually connect back to this very chapter in verse 12, where it reads, I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Understanding it's not enough just to be an outcast for any purpose, because any of us can be cast out because we are super self-indulgent. But the ones who it seems that God looks after is those who have been forgotten, even while being committed to looking out for others, or as this chapter simply says, by doing good. This chapter, again, also reminding us that even beyond the joy or the sense of peace that can come from collective acceptance or group acceptance, God can add, even to the outcast, a type of joy that endures forever.